Jared Kushner did an interview with Axios this weekend where he said insanely stupid shit that yet again verified he's a goddamn liar and doesn't even have a basic understanding of the issues where he's crafting policy in his role as a senior advisor at the White House. Jonathan Swan, who did the interview, covered a lot of different topics. Now, I haven't watched the whole interview or seen the full transcript, but from what I've seen and read, it was an okay interview. My take on it from what I've seen is that Jonathan Swan was really focusing on gotcha questions with no real substance and things that will rile up the fake outrage police in the media. He asked Kushner if he thinks Trump is a racist, and when Jared Kushner said no, he goes down the list of all the racist, bigoted shit that Donald Trump has said and done. Like the whole birtherism conspiracy bullshit when Barack Obama was president and other things. To me, that comes across as an incredibly lazy attempt to make headlines and to just repeat the obvious that Trump is a racist. We all know that he's a racist. That isn't really up for debate at this point. So what do you get from asking people in his administration, in his family, hey, do you think Donald Trump is a racist? They obviously are not going to say, yes, I think my boss or I think my father-in-law is a racist. No one is going to say that. So the only response you're going to get is no, or I don't believe he's a racist. And from there, you predictably go on to catch them in the lie by showing them all the racist shit that Donald Trump has done and asking them if they think it's racist. You're not uncovering anything new with that line of questioning. We all know that Trump associates are liars of the highest order and sycophants. And like I said before, we all know Trump is racist. So the entire purpose of that line of questioning is a gotcha question for the headlines the next day. He also asked about the Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, who was assassinated by the Saudi government, which is an important topic because there are a lot of really important unanswered questions there. Some of the questions that I would ask about Khashoggi would be something like, did you or anyone in the White House misrepresent or cover up facts relating to the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi? Another question I would ask is, why isn't the White House acknowledging the very clear fact that the Saudi crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, played a direct role in ordering the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi? Instead of asking substance-oriented questions like that about Jamal Khashoggi, he asked shit like, what do you see in someone like MBS, who you have a close relationship with, after he murdered Jamal Khashoggi and is doing the genocide in Yemen? Or will you ask the Saudi government to release the body to the family so that they can bury it? I just interpret that as a lot of virtue signaling and a lazy attempt to make headlines without asking real, hard-hitting, substantive questions. But the part of the interview that I think was the most informative and will also get the least amount of coverage is a discussion about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. For those of you who might not remember, one of the many issues that Donald Trump put Jared Kushner in charge of when he hired him at the White House is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And in this interview, Jared Kushner is going to make it extremely clear why he has no business in that position. So the first question from Swan is, do you believe that the Palestinians are capable of governing themselves without Israeli interference? Jared Kushner, quote, I think that's a very good question. I think that that's one that we'll have to see. The hope is that they, over time, can become capable of governing. I think that there are some things that the current Palestinian government has done well, and there are some things that they are lacking. And I do think that in order for the area to be investable for investors to come in and want to invest in different industries and infrastructure and create jobs, you need to have a fair judicial system, freedom of the press, freedom of expression, and tolerance for all religions. First of all, I can't stand the framing and premise of that question. Since when is it acceptable to question whether or not a group of people has the capacity and capability to govern their own territory, much less for someone to come to the decision that a group of people do not have the capacity to govern themselves? If you put in any other group of people in place of Palestinians, you see how utterly ridiculous that whole question even is. Well, do you think that black people are capable of governing themselves? Do you think that Russian people are capable of governing themselves? Do you think that people in Venezuela or Iran or Iraq or Yemen are capable of governing themselves? There is bigotry and imperialism baked into that question, because you're insinuating that there's a person or group of people who are superior. In this case, about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, Netanyahu and the Israeli government would be the ones who are superior. And it's up to them to decide unilaterally if the savages and the barbarians have the capacity to govern themselves. And if they don't, it is now the responsibility of the superior group of people to tame the savages by force for their own good. Yes, the Palestinians, just like any other group of people on this planet, have the capacity to govern themselves, and to imply otherwise, it's kind of insulting. So, not a fan of the question, but Jared Kushner can't help himself, and he takes the exact wrong answer on an obviously ridiculous question. His response is basically, like I've said, the savages are incapable of civility and basic governing skills, so we can't allow them to do it. And the reasoning that he gives are two of the most frustrating parts about this entire conflict for me. The first is that the people who support this genocide of the Palestinians have come up with two completely different standards for what they consider acceptable behavior from the Palestinians and what they consider acceptable behavior from the Israeli government. And the other part that irks me is when they deliberately leave out extremely relevant context about the topic. He basically says they can't govern themselves until, quote, they have a fair judicial system, freedom of the press, freedom of expression, and tolerance for all religions. I consider myself a supporter of human rights, and I think it's important for any government around the world to have all of those qualities. But my problem is Jared Kushner does not have that same standard when it comes to the Israeli government. The Israeli government doesn't have any of those qualities that you're making a prerequisite for the Palestinians to have the right to be able to govern themselves. Israel does not have a fair judicial system. The legislature writes all of these pro-apartheid, pro-genocide policies that crack down on Palestinians, and the courts uphold them. How many times have people in the IDF been prosecuted for clear war crimes and targeting civilians and murdering civilians? But there are a lot of Palestinians who have been in prison for defending their basic human rights. Under no circumstance can you say that the Israeli judicial system is fair. Freedom of the press. There is no one in the world who can make the argument that the Israeli government respects freedom of the press. How many stories have there been of the IDF shooting journalists wearing press jackets with sniper rifles and killing them on sight? It is entirely on purpose. You see them wearing a jacket with giant letters reading press on the front and the back in different languages, and you shoot them anyway with not some out of control assault rifle where the accuracy is insanely low, with a sniper rifle where you have to see them through the scope. That is intentional. That is in no way respecting the freedom of the press. Freedom of expression. Right now, Israel is still cracking down on protesters who are peacefully protesting the right to return, where they walk up to basically the fence that separates the West Bank and Gaza from the rest of Israel. And they are demanding a right to go back to their homes that they were kicked out of to build up new settlements. And they're demanding human rights and an end to the Israeli interference in the daily lives of Palestinians. The most basic things they're protesting for, peacefully, I might add. And hundreds of people have been killed by the Israeli military. Thousands more have been injured. And we're talking about men and women and children and medics and journalists, people who are off limits. But the Israeli military killed them anyway. And for the sole reason that they were protesting the occupation and the genocide that's being forced onto them by Netanyahu and the Israeli government. And you want to talk about the Palestinians before they have the right, before they're capable of governing themselves, they need to first be able to respect the freedom of expression. Get the fuck out of here. I cannot take you serious. I cannot take you serious. And one other point that I want to make about the freedom of the press, I want to go back to that. The audacity for Jared Kushner to even speak those words while the White House where he works is currently doing an unprecedented attack on journalism. They are out for Julian Assange's head. They've charged him with the Espionage Act for the first time in history, charged a journalist with the Espionage Act because the work that he did, the journalism that he did exposed powerful people in the United States. And now there's been the national security apparatus, the political establishment, the mainstream media, they have gone to war to silence Julian Assange. The White House the White House where you work at is leading the charge. And you have the nerve to talk about other people need to adopt freedom of the press when you yourself are shredding that First Amendment of the Constitution more than anybody. So, God damn, just... Now, the last qualification that Jared Kushner had for the Palestinians is that they need to have freedom of religion. I almost don't know how to respond to that. This entire conflict, this entire issue is based on the fact that Israel is doing a genocide of Palestinian Muslims. In the religious text that Jared Kushner himself follows, as well as Benjamin Netanyahu, and a lot of people in the Israeli government, there is a prophecy where they go into the Palestinian territory, destroy one of the most holy sites to Muslims in order to build up a Jewish temple on top of the rubble. And Jared Kushner is still going to have the nerve to come out and say, I don't think the Palestinians will be able to govern themselves unless they can facilitate freedom of religion. I just clearly explained how Israel doesn't fit any of those prerequisites that he's giving to the Palestinians, but yet you would never hear Jared Kushner come out and say, I don't think the Israelis have the capacity to govern themselves because they don't have a fair judicial system. They don't respect freedom of the press. They don't respect freedom of religion, and they don't respect freedom of expression. For those reasons, the people of Israel are not capable of governing themselves. He would never say that because, like I said before, he has two completely different sets of standards for what's acceptable from the Palestinians and what is acceptable from the Israelis. For me, that just makes it impossible to have an honest discussion or debate with these people who are in favor of this genocide because they aren't honest actors. It's one thing if you're biased and you don't even know it, and you interpret the facts of the situation in a direction that leans more favorably towards Israel. But if you're going to have entirely separate standards of what's acceptable behavior, then you're just a hack. You aren't basing your analysis on objectivity and what are the verifiable facts on the ground. You've come into this saying, I'm aligned with the Israeli government and Netanyahu. So whatever they do, whatever they want to do, whatever their plans are, I'm 100% on board with it. And I'm just going to play apologetics for them. And I'm going to have a truckload of fake outrage over what the Palestinians are doing, even though clearly the Israeli government bears more responsibility and their actions have been more egregious during conflict. When you're doing that, you're not having a conversation in good faith. And the other thing that bugs me about Jared Kushner's answer is there's no acknowledgement of the context of the situation. Because another point that people like to make in this argument that Palestinians can't govern themselves is, hey, look at the conditions that they're living in right now. They obviously those are people who are incapable of making the correct decision for themselves. I don't get how you say that without acknowledging what the U.S. has done and what Israel has done to make living conditions for Palestinians as bad as they possibly can be. Israel has bombed the shit out of the infrastructure in Gaza and the West Bank. We're talking about hospitals and schools and marketplaces, and a lot of them put out of commission by relentless airstrikes from the Israeli government. In 2014, Netanyahu bombed the last remaining power plant in the West Bank, and now Palestinian territories only have electricity for about 3 to 4 hours a day. They cannot properly treat and filter their water. Their sewage is backed up. They have no electricity for air conditioning or refrigerators, which means They can't store food or medicine. Israel has the borders around the West Bank and Gaza locked down so that nobody can get in or out. So it's basically a prison. And you also can't import or export goods. So not only are you blocking important aid from getting into people who desperately need it, you are literally making it so that the Palestinians can't have any sort of functioning economy. Unemployment in Gaza is around 52%. So at this point, it's irrelevant any decisions coming out of the Palestinian Authority, because under these conditions imposed by Israel and the US, it is literally impossible for any group of people to thrive. So regardless of how capable and efficient the Palestinian Authority is, under those conditions, under the conditions of genocide, of course the overwhelming majority of the Palestinian people will be suffering. So when people try to make the case that Palestinians are incapable of governing themselves because of the conditions that they're living in, without acknowledging what the US and Israel has done to make those conditions as bad as they are, again, I just cannot have a serious conversation with you because you're being obtuse on purpose. You are ignoring the facts on purpose. Kushner isn't done being stupid and bigoted yet. Swan asks, can they have freedom from any Israeli government or military interference? Jared Kushner, here, watch this one. Quote, I think that's a high bar. It's a high bar to ask for the most basic rights of a sovereign country or a sovereign government. Mind you, this whole time, Jared Kushner in the White House has been going around acting like they're in favor of a two-state solution. But when asked what they think about Palestinians gaining the most basic rights of a sovereign government, their response is, that's a high bar. This is what I'm saying. The people on Jared Kushner's side of this discussion, they are not honest actors. A two-state solution means two separate and sovereign countries. It does not mean one entirely sovereign country and then one territory governed by the other country and occupied by their military. That's exactly the situation that we have right now. So for Kushner to go out and try to sell that bullshit as a two-state solution is so fucking disingenuous. And Swan has another question. Do you believe the Palestinian people deserve their own independent sovereign state with a capital in East Jerusalem? Kushner, quote, there's a difference between the technocrats and there's a difference between the people. The technocrats are focused on very technocratic things. And when I speak to Palestinian people, what they want is they want the opportunity to live a better life. They want the opportunity to pay their mortgage. At this point, his fucking brain is fried and he's speaking gibberish. I have no idea what the fuck he's talking about. The technocrats are focused on very technocratic things. What does that even mean? The question was, do you believe the Palestinian people deserve their own independent sovereign state with a capital in East Jerusalem? That is the most basic question you can expect to be asked if you are in charge of brokering some type of deal between the Israelis and Palestinians. And your response to that is the technocrats are focused on very technocratic things. When I speak to the Palestinian people, what they want is opportunity to live a better life. The technocrats are focused on very technocratic things. I'm at a loss for words. I don't know how to respond for that. That is just, it's fucking gibberish. It's incredibly stupid. So I really spend the majority of this segment ripping Jared Kushner's ridiculous interpretation of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But it's worth noting that the most likely reason why he's taking this ridiculous position when it comes to Israel is just flat out corruption. Jared Kushner has taken hundreds of millions of dollars in loans from Israeli banks. The Israeli government has come to the US and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars at Trump properties in an attempt to buy favorable policy from the Trump administration. And also the Trump family has businesses in Israel. At the end of the day, Netanyahu and the Israeli government wants to do a genocide of the Palestinians. And they've paid their bribes to the Trump administration to get the policy that they want. So all of this talk, all of this back and forth, all this discussion is just pretend. The US government has already decided that we have nothing to gain by helping the Palestinians. So we'll just give the green light to Netanyahu's genocide. So all this bullshit about trying to get a two-state solution and trying to reach some type of peace deal with the Palestinians, that is all bullshit. That is all kabuki theater, so that when the Palestinians don't accept the unfair, ridiculous deal that Jared Kushner and the Israeli government end up proposing, then the Trump administration will just throw up their hands and say, oh man, look, we helped, we tried to help, but they didn't take the deal. So Netanyahu, go ahead and bomb the shit out of Gaza again, bomb the shit out of the West Bank. You could go up in there and fucking invade and just do a fucking massacre and take all the Palestinian lands, because we tried to get that peace deal and it didn't work. So it doesn't look like the situation in Gaza and the West Bank is going to improve at all, or in Israel. And it's fucking infuriating to see these people pretend like they're in favor of peace when we all know you're profiting from the genocide and you have no intention of brokering peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians.